You're listening to the first episode of the Wuxia season that we're going to be doing on this podcast. So let's ask right away, what's Wuxia? And for that matter, what's Wu and what's Xia? Well, we've got a guest who's very well placed to answer these questions, and that's Gigi Chang, translator of, well, one of the several translators involved in bringing Jin Yong's Legend of the Condor Heroes into English. So that'll be I say that will be, I've already recorded it. I know it will be a fantastic chat, but before we get to it, let's go into the TrChFic news. One of our listeners and former guest Lihaila told me when I said TrChFic news, she thought I was saying the Church of Fake News. Well, no, TrChFic, that's just an acronym for the show, Translated Chinese Fiction, TrChFic. So yeah, without further ado, let's hear what the news is for this week. So the first news item is one I've actually already said. It's about the show. We're starting a Wuxia season. We're going to have a whole range of Wuxia experts coming on and teaching me about the genre, because this isn't going to be like the sci-fi season I did where I knew what I was talking about most of the time. This time I'm a relative newbie to the genre, and I certainly haven't read a lot of the literature, so it's going to be a little bit different in that sense, but we do have some fantastic guests and stories lined up, so lots of things to be excited about. All things going according to plan, we're going to have quite a few episodes this season, so it will stretch on. So great news if you're interested in Wuxia. If it puts you to sleep, then I can only strongly suggest that you stay with us, because I think it's going to be more amazing than you would expect. Right, that's the first news item. The second one is also Wuxia related, although why exactly that will become apparent in a minute. So today is Saturday, this is embarrassing, the 30th of May, just have to check there on my phone. And tomorrow, on Sunday, Paper Republic will be posting their Sunday sentence. I think their Chinese name is 1 week, 1 sentence, literal translation. I'm not going to embarrass myself and try and read the Chinese right now. But basically what they do for the duration of lockdown, I believe, in this coronavirus era of doing everything online, they're doing little online translation workshops where basically every Sunday they're going to be posting a sentence in Chinese, and it's everyone gets a shot. Anyone who wishes to join in can leave a comment beneath the post with their translation. So tomorrow they're going to do one taken from Legend of the Condor Heroes, selected by one of its translators, Anna Homewood. So check that out. It'll be up tomorrow, and if you want to have a shot at translating the sentence, it's going to be more than a sentence this time, I believe, but if you want to have a shot at translating it, go for it. I'm considering having a shot, even though I'm not, my level of Chinese is not even close. I'll decide on that once I've seen it. I might decide against it, but yeah, a chance for you to flex your literary and linguistic muscles right there for anyone who's up for the challenge. Okay, now another piece of news about this show itself, quite meta today on the news. Since the last episode on the Book of Shanghai, I have moved the podcast feed, this podcast's feed, from SoundCloud to Podbean. Now that's good for me and the show for various reasons. For you guys, the listeners, one thing you can do is most of your feeds will have transferred automatically, no need to worry. If you were listening on SoundCloud, don't worry too much, because my SoundCloud subscription that lets me have lots of episodes up there will last until March next year. So you can keep listening on SoundCloud as much as you like until about March next year, and then you will be forced to find a different platform to listen on. But if anyone is finding they have problems listening to the show, let me know. I think everything should be fine. The only platform I'm aware of that hasn't caught the new feed yet is Google Podcasts. I never attended to that one at first because I assumed they would catch the new feed right away, but they haven't. Everything else should be fine. So technical things aside, check out the Podbean feed because it lets me format the every post. I can format the text really nicely, and I'm able to include the podcast art that I make for each episode in the episode description. So have a scroll through and have a look at all those beautiful images I made for each episode. I'm sure that'll be fun. I've added a page for the TrChFic map to the Podbean page, so you can browse through all the settings of the stories that we've looked at on the TrChFic map and the author's hometowns and whatnot, and I'll be adding lots of locations for this episode because Legend of the Condor Heroes does jump around a lot of locations that exist in real China, part of China's real geography. So yeah, is there anything else I can say about Podbean? Not really, but do check out the page if you haven't already. It looks quite nice. Okay, and last little actual piece of news. It's another Paper Republic thing. It's something they posted a little while ago now, but I think it's definitely worth plugging because it's a very unique, collaborative, again, coronavirus era piece of translation. So they translated a story called 40 Days, Growing Closer to My Parents During Quarantine by Zhōng Gān Yì Dǎn. But of course it's a good read, but aside from that, from a translation point of view, it's really interesting because what they did, in partnership with the Lead Center for New Chinese Writing, they did like a give it a go, give it a shot, give translation a shot initiative. I've forgotten what the exact wording is, but basically 124 people had a shot at translating the story or parts of it. And what Paper Republic have done is that they gave feedback, online sessions giving feedback to the translations, and they used everybody's input. I'm not sure how exactly it was done. I'm imagining just pragmatically, and they've put together a translation. So it's the product of not one cook, not two cooks, not three cooks, but 124 translators plus one author. So I guess 125 people, plus the people giving feedback, put together this piece. So that will be linked to in the show notes. But if you just search for 40 Days read Paper Republic, or go on the Paper Republic site, you'll find it. It's a cool little thing. So that's all the news. Let's get on and hear my chat with Gigi Chang. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Hi Gigi, how's it going?
Hi, I'm good. Translator's life is not the most exciting in terms of sort of everyday adventures. So quarantine, lockdown or not, it's all the same.
Right, and you're over in Shenzhen just now. Is lockdown pretty much over there, or is it still kind of eking on?
It's pretty much over. All the shops have reopened. I think the only places that aren't reopened are cinemas and theatres.
Right.
But restaurants, bars, hairdressers, they've been open for two months, no, almost three. Like they've been open since at least March.
Since March, a lifetime ago.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I had some news from my mum today because she's looking after my wee sister who's going into her second year at high school, and apparently they're looking at starting the school year with only the kids are going to be going in like staggered. So each week, each student will only be in 2 days a week.
Nice. Well, nice for students. Over here, I think nearly all primary and secondary school kids are back at school now, but not kindergarten or university.
Right.
And they've been staggering in the sense that I think late April they let a couple of classes in, and then now I think it's the full school is back. So each week you get a new year. But I'm very jealous of students. Suddenly you have a 6 month holiday, and then you go back to school for a couple of weeks, and then it's the summer. Summer holiday still exists for students.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit like the summer in Shaja's stories, like an endless summer.
Yeah.
In Dundee, where I'm from, the council, I don't know if other parts of Scotland do this. I don't think maybe they do, I don't know. But there's a thing where every fourth year they extend the summer holiday from 6 weeks to 7. And this year was supposed to be a 7-week summer holiday, but they've said, no, let's just skip it. It's a waste extending it by 1 week.
You can get an extra week of work, of school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting listening back to this episode and the last few, because it's kind of tracking the progress of the lockdown, both where I am and wherever my guest happens to be. But
I'm sure, yeah.
I don't want the listeners to get too bored of lockdown discussion, so I'll just move on to the next question.
Yeah, sure.
Gigi, can you tell the listeners a wee bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and so on?
So I translate from Chinese to English, mostly Chinese fiction, as well as I also do some theatre, both classical theatre, so 戏曲, as well as contemporary theatre.
Cool.
The theatre works is mostly with actual theatre companies. So I did a couple of a Yuan Dynasty drama and a Ming Dynasty drama for the Royal Shakespeare Company for their classic Chinese translation projects.
Fantastic.
Those texts are to be adapted by playwrights for the stage. And then also did a couple of translations for the Royal Court Theatre for their China project a couple of years ago.
Ah.
But theatre translation are far and few in between. So what I mostly work on now is the translation of Jin Yong's Legends of the Condor Heroes. Mm-hmm. The series, yeah.
And that's what we're here to talk about today. Yeah, so before we talk about the actual story of Legend of the Condor Heroes, I think we should maybe lay some foundations for this whole series, and it seems maybe like a weighty task for you, but are you up for it?
Yeah, sure. I'll try my best.
Yeah, it's what I do every episode. So here's a big question that you get first dibs on. What is Wuxia?
I would say they are adventure stories full of characters with amazing kung fu and very big hearts. And because their martial skills are sometimes so fantastically good, in Western genres, some of them become fantasy. Obviously, there are also some of them with more fantastical elements beyond martial arts, like including Taoist cultivation and more traditional mythical Chinese elements. But the foundation of Wuxia are always adventure stories.
Yeah.
With kung fu.
I as kind of as preparation or for getting in the headspace for this series of episodes, I watched, I did together with my dad and my stepmom, me and my girlfriend did a Zoom watch together of the film from Taiwan, The Assassin. And at the end, my dad said, he asked me, so what genre are these films? I just call them Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon films. And I said, well, it's wuxia. And then I thought, wait, that's a Chinese word. What English word shall I use? So I said, first I just automatically went to Kung Fu. It's a Kung Fu genre, but it's not just putting it in the same category as a Jackie Chan and Kung Fu film is kind of missing the point, right?
I guess wuxia tends to be period dramas. I don't think Jackie Chan did a lot of period drama or Bruce Lee. But I guess I would call them as a more heightened version of Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee, but they are all linked.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, it's quite hard to explain what wuxia is very easily in English in terms of translating the terms, because the character will actually mean it embrace quite a wide meaning, from anything martial, military, heroic, basically anything to do with force, with the fist rather than the brush. And that character exists as a flip side of the Chinese character Wen. Yes, it does exist on its own, but actually if you talk about it in Chinese, in your head, in the back of your head, Wen is always its foil. So, right. But one is even harder to explain because it encompasses anything from culture to literature to learning and basically using the brain and the brush rather than the fists. So the two, for me, is always linked together, which makes explaining one or the other quite difficult. And I guess relatively in English language or generally sort of broader quote mark Western culture, you don't have that kind of opposites or foils as much.
Yeah.
you have the head and the heart, but it's kind of like that relationship, but more extreme. And then the word 侠 is also quite interpretive depending on who you are and how you like to see it. Sort of the typical more dictionary definition would be people who stand up and take action when they see wrongs and injustices and to rectify them. And whether this action is within the law is another question, but they react sort of instinctively to wrongs and they just can't stand by and let it happen. And so it could be people who help the disadvantaged, or people who punish those who use their power or strength to bully others that are lesser than them. And it could also be referring to, instead of people, to these events, to the things that this type of people do. So I guess the easiest way to explain it is that in Chinese, most superheroes are called something 侠, like Batman, Spider-Man.
Right. 虾仁, right?
Yeah, so like, 蝙蝠侠 or 蜘蛛侠, so, not Superman. Superman is just Superman.
Right. 超人 or something.
超人, yeah. Because he already 超, he doesn't need any more superlatives.
I was just frantically trying to Google something I should have noted down before the show, but when I was doing my homework about Wuxia, I learned something I didn't see coming. So, as you explained for me and the listeners, Wu and Xia, those two characters, are not just words but concepts that go really quite far back into Chinese culture and history. But the combination of them, according to my homework, it's an import from Japanese. What I was trying to look up is how to say that word. Is that correct, or have I been misled by the internet?
I don't actually know, I will ask the internet too.
Yeah.
I think the word, individually, they definitely 侠, because 侠 actually already includes some forms of physical action.
Yeah.
If you see injustice, you take action. Mm-hmm. Often that might be a physical thing rather than an argument. But whether this phrase is come from...
Yeah, it was one. I think I got that one from Wikipedia, so a little bit questionable. Yeah. But let's march on before we get in big trouble. So let's talk about Jin Yong now. Can you tell listeners a little bit about Jin Yong and what makes his contribution to the wuxia genre particularly special?
Jin Yong is best known as a novelist to particularly Chinese readers, but he had actually worked all his life as a newspaperman. So he is quite unlike most writers we know. He is a very, very successful businessman. He founded a big newspaper empire in Hong Kong. He's practically done everything you can do as a human being, and he was very good at all of it. So he was born in 1924, and he passed away a couple of years ago in 2018. He came from a scholarly, influential family in Haining, Zhejiang, not far from Hangzhou. The family home he was born in was a sprawling courtyard complex with 90 rooms. So you can imagine the privileged position that he was born into. And also in China, particularly back in the days, if you're from that kind of family, your early education would be very
classical,
rounded, classical and round, like you'll be well educated by probably a few years old. His youth and teenage years was obviously in the 30s and early 40s, so that was wartime in China.
Right.
So he moved around a little bit to go to school, but mostly in Zhejiang region. And he wanted to become a diplomat, so he actually got into university in Chongqing, which at that point was China's capital.
Right.
Studied for a while, and then he left and went to Shanghai to study law at the Suzhou University. And the first job he had was actually a translator. He was employed by 大公报 in Shanghai to translate Newswire into Chinese. And that was 1946, so just after the war is finished. And then he was sent to Hong Kong in 1948 to work for the newspaper. And that was how he went to Hong Kong.
Right. It's quite good timing in a way.
Yeah, by the 50s, he's changed jobs and he became an editor, editing the sort of supplemental, 副刊, so supplemental, this is the non-news pages, supplement cultural pages. Around that time, he was also writing and directing films. So, and very soon, also in the 50s, in 1955, he started writing his first serialized novel in the martial arts novel in the newspaper, which is on top of his duty as editor and contributor, a journalist, writing reviews or commentaries, political show commentaries, news writing for the newspaper. So he's extremely prolific and, by now, he's already been a journalist, a translator, a film director, a script writer, and a fiction writer. And by 1959, he founded his own newspaper, Mingbao, which is still one of the most respected broadsheets in Hong Kong.
Oh, right.
And to attract readers, because this is 4 years on from his first serialized novel in the newspaper, he knew that by writing these wuxia stories, he can attract readers and get people to buy this new newspaper that no one has heard of. So that was really how things snowballed. Beginning, it's a practical beginning to attract readers. Yeah, and Jin Yong himself was a big wuxia fan. He was an avid reader, so he was familiar with foreign literature and with films and other media, which for me is was really how he contributed to the genre of wuxia, which in the past was more probably rooted in the sort of episodic format of Chinese novels, fiction.
Yeah.
So like 章回小说, so like 水浒 or many others, where each chapter probably is quite individual. So
almost like a
someone
TV
came
show,
in,
right?
did something, and there's and sort of a bit sitcom like.
Yeah.
So they probably, each characters in each chapter probably run on a fairly similar arc. So after a while, it could be a bit repetitive. If you haven't read any, if our listeners haven't read any sort of traditional Chinese fiction or the older type 章回小说, I guess maybe a reasonable comparison would be to video games. So, you shoot, get treasure, repeat, you get through a level, fight a boss, get through a level, fight a boss. It's a little bit like that. Whereas I think Jin Yong, because he's familiar with Western literature, with film at that time, this is 1950s, there's lots of great films and that you can access in Hong Kong. His stories really has a lot more world building. It has grander, overarching, interwoven narratives. So this is one of his innovation for the genre. And his characters are, he doesn't just write for exciting fights. He's actually more interested in stories. And the stories of these characters or their growth are often through the fight. Rather than like an Italian opera, you tell your story and then everything stops and they sing an aria for 10 minutes with the same line. His stories, the fights push the story on and tell you more about the characters and their personality and what they're trying to get to, where they're trying to get to.
Yeah.
So these stories tends to be set in turbulent time in history. The characters are facing the troubles of the time. and as well as their own personal problems. And often these two came to heads together, and they have to make bigger decisions about how they could contribute to society. But then I think a lot of his protagonists are individuals or independent figures of society. They aren't usually part of the government or any official associations, or if they only have very, very minor roles in it. So they're essentially laypersons doing things in the world and trying to change their world for the better. And I guess another thing that is very typically Jin Yong and get written about by academics as well is how he used a lot of filmic technique in writing.
Right.
So which in translation it probably is even more prominent, and I've seen, on Goodreads, and people were like, why does the points of view flips all the time? Like one line is the character A and the next line is character B.
Right.
Because that is how he written it. So he wrote his prose like it's the camera lens. So one moment you are looking at Guo Jing, and the next you're looking at Lotus Huang. You get a lot of reaction shots. You get a lot of fast cuts. It's very, very visual. He used montages and flashbacks and filmic dialogues and camera angles. Sometimes you get, an aerial shot, and the next is a close-up, and it's slow motion, fast.
Mm-hmm.
All these flipping around and changing camera angles, just like a film. And I guess that might be something to do with the fact that he actually worked as a film director and screenwriter at one point.
Right.
Sort of another thing is, this is probably more to do with his sort of interest in literature as a whole, Western literature as well. His characters, he does spend some time working on their psychologies. They're quite complex. They're not just heroes or villains, and everyone got their own shortfall if you're a good guy, but the bad guys also have some redeeming features.
Yeah.
They are not that simplistic in that token sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing that is very, very special about Jin Yong is that martial art fictions are generally considered lowbrow pulp fiction.
Right.
They rot your brain and stuff like that. Popular stuff that a lot of parents don't actually want their kids to be reading, but they couldn't. It's very difficult to stop your children from reading Jin Yong, and he managed to also cross over from the sort of very, very popular quote mark low end or common readers all the way to the very high-end literary professors, government officials, and pretty much everyone at some point would have been obsessed with his work.
Right.
And to have a book where an 11-year-old could enjoy it as much as an 85-year-old, that is quite special.
Yeah, definitely.
There are not a lot of books that could claim that. Yeah.
Mm.
So there's a very long answer.
That's fine. I'm just trying to remember all the responses I had, because everything you were saying was matching my experience of reading Hero Born, but also the homework I did. First thing I'll get out the way is I did find that thing about the Japanese word. It was indeed on Wikipedia. It's cited, but it is Wikipedia, so I don't 100% trust it.
Okay.
So I'll just read the paragraph really quickly. The term wuxia as a genre label itself first appeared at the end of the Qing dynasty, a calque of the Japanese, and then I don't speak Japanese, so sorry if this is wrong. Japanese bukkyo, a genre of oft militaristic and Bushido-influenced adventure fiction. The term was brought to China by writers and students who hoped that China would modernize its military and place emphasis on martial values. And it quickly became entrenched as the term used to refer to xiayi and other predecessors of wuxia proper. In Japan, however, the term bukkyo faded into obscurity. So that's that. If anyone who's listening has reasons to disbelieve this, please do contact the show. Now I'm going to try and remember everything I wanted to reply to you. What you were saying about movies, that matches my experience reading A Hero Born, especially the fight scenes where I felt like he wasn't trying to have any like literary ambiguity. He was trying to describe every single thing that happened so you could follow it precisely.
Oh yeah.
Quite never quite excruciatingly, but it's on like the scale of completely ghostly and ambiguous to excruciatingly describing every detail. He's definitely on the excruciating side of the scale.
Yeah, I think what probably very different from, English language fiction is that, usually if you read a book, you get one big fight scene.
Right.
If lucky, and that's it. Uh-huh. Whereas in this book, every chapter has a big fight scene.
Yeah, that's true.
and there's a lot of details, left hand, left foot, right foot, and then everyone else's left hand and right hand. You just got to a point where, okay, whose hand is this anymore? But I think the thing is that the details in Chinese probably don't seem as detailed. I mean, very badly put. But
I think I know what you mean.
Because in the martial arts is a big part of Chinese culture. Be it in theatre, so you have in traditional Chinese theatre, you have everyone can fight. I mean, there are people who are more specialized in fighting roles, but even your hua dan, your maiden, young maid dan roles, those women or men who specialize in those will have some form of kung fu, they to be able to do what they do on stage. So as such, the whole vocabulary that Jin Yong used, he didn't invent it. It exists for hundreds, possibly thousands of years in Chinese writing.
Right.
So, whereas in English, where it's fairly limited, you don't have books after books describing, sword techniques or boxing techniques, but whereas in China they exist. They sort of so I think that is one major difference in how the text might read.
Right.
Because in English everything seems to be, wow, you're describing all these things that most writers don't usually describe in that detail. Whereas in Chinese, it's just fairly standard. And whether it's in the past you grew up watching traditional Chinese theatre, Chinese operas with the fighting scenes, or like us younger people who grew up with TV and films, which still have a great martial element in them. From Bruce Lee to Jet Li to Jackie Chan, all that amount of fighting doesn't feel foreign or strange, and you take great joy in it. That's the thing that you want to read. You don't really care about the prose in between. You just want to go from fight scenes to the next one. Right.
Yeah. I have remembered another thing I was wanting to mention. So what you said about the heroes being generally not big players in society. So in my homework, it was telling me that the kind of xia, like the wandering knights or the warriors, this is kind of, it's their traditional role is not to get involved. And they're in this, I don't know what you'd call it, but they're part of this kind of loose collective called the Jianghu, so the rivers and lakes. And it's kind of, the whole point of the Jianghu is that they're not I guess it would be the Shanhu. The rivers and lakes are in contrast to the mountains and lakes, I think it is. Have I got that right?
I think, I guess Chinese society in the past is extremely stratified. So you have the official capacity, the government officials and military. So you're either that or you're not part of the officialdom. So and then they have like segregated into different not caste, but different
like roles.
Roles, yeah. You got your farmers, you got your merchants, you got your actors. There are all these kind of groups or types that you belong to. So I personally see that anything that is not part of the officialdom is part of jianghu. They don't necessarily have to be gangsters.
Right. Yeah.
But but that boundary and meaning is what jianghu even mean is very, very fluid.
Right.
It's there are various meanings, but it just generally means you're not making money out of the emperor.
Right. So it's all about the cash, about the money. It's in some ways.
It's where, how do you make your living? Which part of society do you belong?
Right.
I guess to put it simply, yes. There's the official part of the society, which is run which belong, you run under the hierarchy of the emperor or the court, and then there's the side that runs parallel to it and support the court. So it's the other side.
Something that matched up a little bit, you were mentioning earlier about Shuihu Zhuan, water margin.
Yeah.
I learned a bit about that one because I did an episode on Brian Holton's Scots translation of it, the Moss Flow. And so I thought, all right, I'll read the part of his translation that's up there online. And I guess I should have a look at the English translation too. I'll just read the whole thing. And then, oh my God, I saw the list of chapters. And I realized it was enormous. So I think I maybe
read a few chapters.
Yeah, that's what I did. But I read some like little articles on it, and it was talking about how one of the, a thing that is going on in that story is like a band of not necessarily wandering knights, but like outlaws, like you said, almost like gangsters. They don't just set up camp; they set up their own little kind of like alternate society, their own little. Maybe commune is the wrong word, but they have like a parallel society.
Sort of a bit communes.
Yeah.
I think it's, they don't necessarily have to be outlaws, but I would probably look at it as anything that's outside that sort of, imperial exam route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that is one very close and well-defined world. Anything else beyond it, there is some level of fluidity and crossover.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is the last thing I wanted to mention. This kind of links into the tension or binary or whatever you want to call it between individuality and like the bigger society. So a lot of the homework I did that wasn't just reading web articles was a book I managed to get through the magic of academic access. It's called Paper Swordsman, the fiction or some such of Jin Yong by a guy called John Christopher Ham. It's a very interesting name. And in that he stressed in a few of the chapters that Jin Yong set quite a lot of his stories during like a fall or near the end of a dynasty. So Legend of the Condor Heroes were set during the Southern Song, and we never see the collapse of the Southern Song, but generally speaking, we see it under attack and losing ground from the Jin, Jurchen, and then later the Mongols from the north. And then other of his stories are set during the end of the Ming and maybe the end of the Qing too. Yeah. So there's some extent that the characters are not involved in defending the nation or the empire, and other times they are. And I don't know if I really have a question here, but I thought it was for me, that would be something very interesting about these stories. Yeah.
I can't help but wonder how much of that has to do with his own upbringing, his childhood. Because he also grew up at that kind of turbulent times.
Right.
But then when you think about all these Chinese fiction, they all seem to be set in some form, the older historical fiction, they're all set in some form of a turbulent time, be it the death of an emperor or some kind of power change. Sanguo is three kingdoms fighting each other. The whole point. And Shuihu, Outlaw of the Marsh, is when there were a lot of rebellions. And I guess and everything I can sort of think of is, I guess, the earthquake of the greater society caused more earthquakes within the individual's lives, and that was what maybe caused them to act.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into too spicy or hot water here, but so like you were saying, Jin Yong, he grew up in like wartime China, so Civil War, Japanese invasion, more Civil War, and then I guess he was out of mainland China by the time the revolution happened and the Communist Party took control of the country. But he was writing these stories about dynastic China from kind of out in a way outside of China in colonial Hong Kong. So and I've read that he was quite widely read outside of China, outside of mainland China in Hong Kong and among the diaspora. And there was a really, really significant moment when he met one of his biggest fans, Deng Xiaoping, the president of China, of the most known for like China's reopening up to the world. But I don't want to over rely on that analogy, because all analogies are a bit ropey, and I feel like especially when politics are involved. But is that something you associate much with Jin Yong, or do you think it's not something that should be overemphasized?
Not really. I mean, I think it's for us readers, Chinese kids growing up with Jin Yong stories, that doesn't even factor. That's more like a media talking point than his actual alert. We like him for his stories. It doesn't matter actually who he is, what he thinks about anything.
Right.
We care about Guo Jing and the characters. The sheer joy of reading, the sheer joy of these stories. It's got this magical ability of making a 10-year-old, 11-year-old read 1 million words in one sitting. So what famous person or politician read his work or not, a 10-year-old honestly couldn't care less.
Right. You've actually reminded me of the last thing I wanted to mention that your longer answer made me think of. When you're talking about everyone in the Chinese-speaking world reading Jin Yong. So it was, I forget whose anecdote this was, but it was contained or quoted in that book, Paper Swordsman. So there was some academic literati guy he'd been scolding his child because his child was reading Jin Yong's books, and this guy thought, it's trash. My kid shouldn't be reading it, especially because some other literati figure was going to come over to their family house for dinner. But guy, the guest is held in really high regard. But then when their guest shows up, he's got something like 3 books under his arm. He's got one of the Chinese classics, some modern European classic, and then Legend of the Condor Heroes. And then the kid's no longer in trouble because the one who's able to talk most enthusiastically and at most depth with their guest is the kid, the Jin Yong reader.
Was the kid, yeah. Well, I think if you've grown up in among Chinese kids in China, or in the last sort of 30 years or 40 years, or Hong Kong or Taiwan or any other Chinese speaking places, you would probably know someone who got scolded or slapped around the wrist for reading Jin Yong, like your schoolmates, because parents think, this is not particularly edifying. But you will also have friends, probably yourself including, that have read his books through the night, under the duvet with a torch, and you hear this sort of addictive reading behavior from girls, from boys. Me, I am in the mid-30s, but I've also heard academics now in the 60s, 70s, 80s talking about the first time they read Jin Yong. And a lot of the time, these are Chinese literature professors who are very, very well respected. And a lot of them sort of at first when they heard about what is this Yong Wuxia from Hong Kong, and they were pirated copies that people either smuggle in or copied out or whatever. Books makes their way through society by themselves.
Right.
And a lot of people would sort of go into it probably with a little bit snooty about them. And then the moment you start reading and you'll be like, what is this, crack cocaine? You just couldn't stop. There are all these stories of people in the early 80s, academics or say, oh yeah, I just sat outside this library on a little stool and inhale the whole Condor Heroes in one sitting, and became addicted and became a scholar of Jin Yong stories. So, and they regard it as highly as, other classical works. So I think there is definitely something special about these books.
Yeah.
And to anyone who's read them, that's the magic. And obviously and as a reader today, we can't divorce it from the many TV and film adaptations since the book existed. Because Condor was written in the mid-1950s, I think 1957, if my memory serves me right. And immediately there is a film version. And then by the 1980s, 1983, TVB in Hong Kong made a version of Condor Heroes as a TV series for, I can't remember how many episodes, but 40, 50 plus episodes. And that was so popular that, all over Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, and mainland China and Taiwan. And that really spread Jin Yong all over Asia. And no one can read these books in Chinese without knowing some form of a TV version.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's really bind up with the visual cultural memory, as well as there's the TV theme songs as well, because those from the 80s are still being sung today.
That's funny. I was mentioning earlier about water margin, and another little fun thing I did kind of for research for that episode was I watched one of the show, the first couple episodes of an adaptation of it. So not strictly wuxia, but there's the main hook in the chorus is burned into my brain. It's one of the few lines from a Chinese song I know.
Yeah.
I won't sing it down the line.
That's the danger.
Yeah.
The danger of Chinese television shows, their theme songs, earworms that stay with you for years and decades.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess I'd had that experience as a kid watching some of the anime that was coming over to British TV channels, which were also catchy, but in a completely different way. There was another thing I was going to say. What was it? Oh yes. So when you were saying one of the special things about the Jin Yong's books is that people are able to devour them. And this is like a thing I think is just in literature in general, people don't talk about much, is like the devourability or not just readability, but the speed and that kind of like the natural speed you can get through some books. Maybe that's, people use the terms dense and light, but I think that's a little bit different from how quickly you can read it. Something can be moderately dense or dense, but might have a really high readability. And I think there's like a sweet spot of something which is properly good literature, but is also extremely readable. And I guess maybe that's in that little overlap in the Venn diagram. It seems like that's where Jin Yong sits for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Definitely.
So I think that's all my... Oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, it's fine.
Okay, cool. Well, we've been on question 2 of the Jin Yong and wuxia section for so long now, so let's go into the last one. We've probably answered a lot of this already, but just in case we've missed anything, what does wuxia, or what do wuxia and Jin Yong mean to you on like a more personal or subjective level, if there's anything we've not covered already?
I think Jin Yong, for me personally, is how I learned Mandarin.
Oh, wow.
And it's because, so I grew up in Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s, and it was a purely Cantonese society.
Right.
We only speak Cantonese. No one speaks any Mandarin. But at that time, there was a 1994-5 adaptation of Dragon's. Yì Dǎn Hou Long Ji. So it's, what is it called in English? Heaven's Sword and Dragon's Saber. Yes, Heaven's Sword and Dragon's Saber.
Okay.
That it was a co-production, I think, Hong Kong and Taiwan. At that point, the televisions are stereo, so you can choose to listen to the original Mandarin voices or the dubbed Cantonese voices.
Oh, cool. And
so we, as a family, we watch it in Mandarin, but obviously, like all Chinese show, it's subtitled.
Right.
So by, 40, 50 episodes later, you understand it. Fine, yeah. And I guess another thing is the joy of reading that he introduced, but that you get from reading his books. I think that's something that lasts a lifetime for many people. And he's, because, I was 10, 12 when a lot of these TV shows were on. So it's also so bound up with some of the happiest memory growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so through the TV shows and through the TV theme songs as well. So, because all of those were written by, at that point, written and sung by Hong Kong pop stars and lyricists. And it really was like a golden age of Hong Kong popular culture. So I think it's also mixed together with my own childhood.
Right. What you were saying earlier about how the literary wuxia is kind of inextricably linked in people's minds with the visual versions, mostly film and TV. So I'm sure I'm not saying anything particularly insightful when I say, like, in the English-speaking world, that's kind of how wuxia is known. It's as a film genre. And it's, I think, really just through like a handful of films that were made in China.
I think Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Which was, I guess, specifically targeting international audiences.
Yes, that one is.
Yeah, that one, House of Flying Daggers, Hero, and Curse of the Golden Lotus, and maybe some others. But I've not seen Curse of the Golden Lotus, but those other three I watched as a kid lots and lots of times. And even without anyone telling me this is a genre called wuxia, I could kind of tell that they were all
connected.
Yeah, they had like tropes,
aesthetically,
and visuals and aesthetics, character types, plots, and it worked straight away. It's, I guess, the magic of genres. They're kind of like, this is a very stupid analogy, and it might not make sense to a lot of people, but I work in one of the things I work in is book design. And if you want to send a file you made in InDesign, which is like the Adobe design software, you don't just send the file, you have to do a thing called package, which basically puts all the files you've been working in together into one folder, and you send that one packaged folder. And the advantage of that is the person who receives your package then can operate the full design with all the working parts, and they're all integrated within themselves. And I feel like that's a magic of genres, is they're kind of like self-contained things that anyone can jump into and hopefully without too much prior context enjoy. So there's a bit of a fraught or a tenuous analogy, but that's how I feel about when I was a kid and my dad put me and my brother down in front of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and just magically it was not really very alien despite being completely new to us.
Yeah, well, because who doesn't want to, jump around and wave a sword
Exactly.
at another person?
Especially wee boys,
Yeah.
Or everyone. I shouldn't say just wee boys, but yeah.
I definitely want to,
Yeah.
I still get excited watching like fight scenes these days.
Yeah. It's been...
Especially when, the actor is actually a martial artist, because you can really tell.
Totally.
When they've thrust, like Michelle Yeoh is...
Yeah, she's
cool.
Extremely cool. That film I mentioned, Watching the Assassin, that's the first wuxia... it's basically the first wuxia film I've watched in years, and it's made me realize, what have I been doing? I need to be watching more.
Yeah. You can get into a lot of Chinese TV shows.
That's
very long, though.
I know, that's a thing despite having lived in China all that time, I never worked through a Chinese TV show. Maybe partly because I was aware it could be very long and I wouldn't have known where to start. But yeah, one day I will, for sure. I guess we should fly on to our questions about
to the book.
The book, the actual book, yeah. There's a question I didn't write down, but I realised I should probably ask this. So a thing I noticed in my homework is there's a little bit of a difference in the title of the English translation that you were one of the translators who worked on, and the original Chinese, at least based on what I was seeing in Paper Swordsman, because John Christopher John Ham, or whatever he was called, was referring to the book as the Condor Shooting Heroes. Is that the literal translation of the Chinese title?
So we went for Legends of the Condor Hero, which is a slight version of the 1983 TVB version of 射雕英雄传, and that is the best known title of the book or this story in the greater non-Chinese speaking world.
Right.
So it's basically the best known title. Yeah. So Anna actually wrote a note explaining why we went for this instead of anything else, because I think there is a recognition and there's a familiarity with the existing audiences of either the TV show or of the TV show mainly,
right,
because a lot of Chinese diaspora watch that version. I mean, I've got multiple friends who still speak Cantonese to this day because of this TV show.
Okay, I can hear there's a very small tiger in your background. Do you need to deal with it?
Yeah, I've got a cat. No, it's okay.
All right. So you mentioned Anna. That's Anna Holmwood. So I guess we should tell anyone listening who's not familiar that you and a few other translators all worked on this one together.
Yes. So Legends of the Condor Hero is one novel of 40 chapters, almost 1 million characters long. So commonly in Chinese, it's split into 4 volumes of 10, but published at the same time, so you buy a whole set.
Right.
And with Legends of the Condor Hero being translated in English, to translate 1 million words will take absolutely years.
Yeah.
And our publisher, Macleod Press, decided that they want to do it 1 volume per year.
Mm-hmm.
So the books are split roughly about 10 chapters per volume. And Anna Holmwood, the translator of the first book, A Hero Born, is really instrumental to these books being available in English. So she was very involved in the process of the English rights being acquired, and she also translated the first book. And as she started translating the book, she realized it is very difficult for one person to do the whole 1 million words within that time frame. So she brought me in to do the second book, A Bond and Done. So basically she's like chapter 1 to 9, I'm 9 to 18 or 19.
Right.
And then we worked together on book 3, A Snake Lies Waiting. And then I am working with a third translator, Shelley Bryant, on the last volume, A Heart Divided.
I realise now that we've kind of skipped the story questions and gone on to the technical ones. So I think, let's finish off the technical questions.
We can go back to the story now.
Yeah. Well, I think we can polish off these technical ones, do the story, and then see where we go.
Yeah.
So
sure.
We've got you and the translators working together. I want to ask you a question about naming, because you gave us the names of the parts of the English translations. A Hero Born, A Bond Undone, Snake Lies Waiting, and what was the last one?
A Heart Divided.
A Heart Divided. So essentially extremely awesome names, fantastic titles. Are they the creations of you guys, the translators, or have you translated those from Chinese sources?
Those titles we've given to the translation.
Right.
Because we can't just call them 1, 2, 3, 4.
No, yeah. Well,
it has to have a title. And something that hopefully give you a sense of what that volume might be about.
And they have the right kind of epic feel and tone as well. Definitely.
Yeah. You try to create a series title.
Yeah,
so they feel connected. Yeah,
I really like them. So another thing about naming, there's the naming of the characters in the novel or the novels. I should say for what's the word? For the record, I've read A Hero Born. I haven't read the others in the series yet. Just for the record, but the naming of the characters. It would be a tricky thing, I guess, any way you wanted to go about it. But how did yourself and the other translators go about it? And I guess there must have been quite a bit of coordination involved.
Yeah, so Anna started book 1 before I started book 2. So, but we both agree, and together with Shelley, that as I mentioned before, the whole point of a Jin Yong novel is that joy of reading, that sheer joy that comes from the page, come between the lines. So in the translation, that's something we have to capture. And also we have to capture that relentless propulsion that keeps you reading, keeps you turning the page.
Yeah.
So that is possibly one of the main guideline behind every decisions made in the translation process, and that is beyond prose. That includes names of characters and moves. With character names, I guess majority of translated fiction these days, especially contemporary one, would just pinyin everyone. But the thing is about Chinese name is that they are not sounds. Written Chinese name are meanings, and if you read in Chinese, it's always the meaning that jump first at you. It's not the sound. Also, because everyone speaks a different dialect, so the sounds are always different.
Of course, yeah.
So, but you sometimes some names might not even come to you. It's quite different from, say, English names. So, when you see a name like Mary, you don't always immediately only think of the Virgin Mary.
No, of course not.
Yes, but whereas certain Chinese name, the only thing it could be is what the character names means.
Right.
And with Wuxia, with a lot of Jin Yong names, the characters are named for a reason. A little bit like Harry Potter, Sirius Black, he is the dog. Yeah. He's the black dog. Or Remus Lupin, the werewolf, he's called basically Wolf Wolf.
Right.
So if you know that, then you just can't stop seeing it. Whereas in Chinese, it's much more immediate. You don't need to know Latin. You don't need to know about the story of the founding of Rome to realize that Remus Lupin it refers to wolves twice. So because that immediacy of meaning, so some names we have gone for meanings because it's intention of the writer or it's very important to the characterization of the character.
Yeah.
Some other characters, like historical characters, we tend to retain their name in pinyin. And then, so those are the two main reasons. And then there's a third thing, which is the problem of pinyin. When you've reduced wildly different Chinese name into pinyin, from characters into pinyin, things that you could never mix up written in Chinese character might become very, very similar spelled out.
Yeah, like the two Shanxi provinces.
Yeah, so they're the same. But in Chinese, it's like you have to be mad to get them. You just can't mix them up in written for character form.
Right, yeah.
I mean, so for an example would be there are 3 characters in the book. One called Ke Zhen E. The other 2 are Ouyang Feng and Ouyang Ke. So the problem with these characters, they tend to appear all at the same time. And Ouyang Ke, his name, is the combination of the other 2 characters. So when you have all 3 of them on the same scene, you're kind of like, oh God, what do I do now? Mm-hmm. And also because you will get them mixed up, but the bigger problem is that you will also trip yourself over in the prose, because very often in Chinese we're very used to referring to characters by their full names, but in English language fiction, actually you don't see full names that often.
No, it's like if your mum's telling you off, my mum would say Angus Henderson Stewart, but if you put it on the page it looks crazy. It
would mean something else.
Yes.
It would bring in a different connotation. So with those 3 characters, because they also appear on the same page all the time, we've given the 2 Ouyangs quote mark a name rather than use pinyin, because I have to keep we have to keep the prose flowing as well. Yeah. Because when you have 5 characters fighting each other, everyone is in their full name, then the writing will get really sluggish and lumpy. Mm-hmm. It doesn't fly. So there's some practical reason as well. Yeah.
I wonder, because there's all these kind of like I don't know if you can call them hidden traps, but there's all these things that could trip up a translator or pose like just very, very fiddly technical questions. Is that a reason why it's only in this, well, at the end of this decade that Legend of the Condor Heroes is coming into English? Is it because it's a lot more or a lot less straightforward than translating, say, like a Mo Yan story or something?
So personally, I think that it has a lot to do with reading habits. Because and also interest in China. So I was in the UK in the early 2000s, and at that point, no one's interested in Chinese stories. The only Chinese things that anyone interested about coming from China would be contemporary art, visual arts.
Right.
And that's early 2000. And then if you move, so in the past 15 years or so, you can see interest or deepening, be it partly to do with the economic integration or globalization, and as China become wealthier, people have to, learn more about it.
Yeah.
And also because there's more connections, easier connections through the internet, through cheaper flights, through opportunities, work opportunities. After 2008 in Europe, in America, you finish university, there's not a great deal you can do. Whereas China's on the rise, or Asia in general, there are more work opportunities. And that definitely there's some cross-pollination in that sense. That's a greater social, economical, political landscape. But I think the other thing that's really important for me is that how fantasy and very long books became mainstream in English language readership. So from, say, something like Harry Potter or Game of Thrones, or even with the films of Lord of the Rings, and all of that came in sort of late 90s, early 2000, so fiction went from 200 pages to 1,000 pages, and people read it.
Yeah, I remember as a kid thinking a bigger Harry Potter book is good because it's more Harry Potter.
Yeah. And also, I don't know, I remember sort of even in the early 2000s, fantasy and science fiction are the sections in the back for nerds. And now that stuff is, right up front on the ground floor. So I think that also help with people acceptance or create a bigger market or interest in these very long books.
I could totally see that, yeah. Right, so let's rewind and get to the questions about the story, because nothing's more important than the story ultimately. It's all very well and good to be technical and philosophical and intellectual, but nobody cares if you don't have the story in the first place. So in a nutshell, what is the story of the Legend of the Condor Heroes about?
It's a coming-of-age story of our hero, Guo coming to terms with his talent, abilities, as well as his vocation and identity as a martial artist, as well as a son of the dwindling Song Empire when it's facing 2 foreign invaders. So, do you want more about Guo Jing?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. So, a thing I learned doing my homework, reading John Christopher Ham, or whatever he's called, book Paper Swordsman, is that there's a little bit of a pattern in the start of a lot of Jin Yong's wuxia stories. So we start off with some kind of a traumatic event. We often start off from the perspective of some characters who are quickly killed off by that traumatic event.
Outside the story.
Yeah, and then we have a younger character connected with this tragedy in some way who has to go on a journey of self-cultivation or self-discovery and so on. And then finally they bring justice or get vengeance or what have you. Is that
that's a classic growth story. Yeah. So yes, Guo Jing was born in Mongolia after his father's been killed. There's a lot of spoilers to come, and he grew up in Mongolia. In the household of Genghis Khan, and then but in the background there was a wager set between a Taoist monk and the 7 freaks of the South. So, and the 7 freaks of the South are tasked to train Guo Jing to face the Taoist Qiu Chuji's disciple when they both come to the age of 18. So the story really starts so the first book is mostly about Guo Jing growing up to the point of 18, when he was about to face this duel. And then the rest of the books is about when he turned 18, he returned to his homeland, to the Song Empire, where his father lived, and then he went on adventures to discover himself, to finally understand who he is and where his allegiance lies. Because the bigger background is that the Jurchen, the Jin Empire, has invaded half of the Song Empire, and the Mongols, the Mongolian led by Genghis Khan, are eyeing both the Jurchen and the Song Empire and want to take them both.
Yeah, it almost felt like tiers to me. Like, we have the kind of least military, softest target down in the south, the Southern Song. Above them to the north, we have the Jin bearing down on them. And then sitting above the Jin, even further north, there's the invincible Mongols led by Genghis Khan.
Mongols, yeah.
So I think there's a couple things that come up on my podcast a lot, just based on the things I kind of obsess over, and one of them is just maps and geography. I have a little custom Google map where I put the settings of stories for each episode. I mark them, and then also the author's place of residence or hometown. So for this episode, I think I'll be marking lots of locations for sure, because the story travels all over China, and I guess
China,
even the wider
and
region,
beyond.
Into the Mongolian steppes. But so two things. One was, a thing I learned reading, again, a difference in the naming between you guys kind of highly readable translation, and maybe the Paper Swordsman more literal translations. So in the books, in the English translations, the Seven Freaks of the South are just that. That's what they're called, the Seven Freaks of the South. That's the name of their band of martial artists. In Paper Swordsman, he's named them, I think, the Seven Eccentrics of Jiangnan. And number one, it's just quite a funny, wonky title. But the other thing is Jiangnan. That's like a running theme of this show. So during my time in China, I lived in Zhejiang province and then Shanghai, and I explored a lot of Zhejiang and Jiangsu. So whenever I hear Jiangnan or I see Jiangnan come up, I just have to mention it. But I guess it is important to the book because a lot of what happens is set around Lin'an, so like historical Hangzhou.
Yeah. Hangzhou, yeah.
Yeah.
But most people don't know what Jiangnan is.
Right.
Unless you're Chinese.
Yeah, so you can't put it in the English translation.
Unless you're mainland Chinese, actually, I would say.
Right.
Or you have connection to that region. Like, if you don't have a reasonable geographical knowledge, you might not have any idea what Jiangnan is.
So, like, most of the Hong Kong, even like the Hong Kong readership, a lot of them wouldn't get necessarily where that's pointing to or what it means.
I think older generations will know. Younger, harder to say.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I mean, if I had lived in, or the years I'd been in China, if I had been anywhere else, I might never have learned what
you probably
Jiangnan
wouldn't
was.
know.
Probably
because it's not the province name.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a shorthand that has been used for generations or hundreds of years for that greater area, which encompasses at least 2 provinces.
Yeah, at least 2. I think I had a Chinese language teacher who told me it can be anywhere south of the Yangtze. So she was saying like even the southern border could technically be Jiangnan.
Huaihe doesn't matter. Yeah,
right.
It's a very vague concept of a general area, which I would say today we call Zhejiang and Jiangsu, but
then
but it's debatable.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of northern Jiangsu that's too north to be.
Yeah, that's probably not Jiangnan, no. Anywhere with canals and white houses and grey roofs and.
Yeah,
I would still call it.
The other thing I was going to say I'm a bit of a nerd for, I play a lot of the Total War games, and I would be playing the Three Kingdoms one if I had a more expensive computer, but I'm not that rich, so I'm not playing it yet. But through them and through learning a little bit about history, I did learn about how the Mongols, the Mongolians, fought their battles and just how unbeatable they were. And so when we got to a bit in the story where I think it's Genghis Khan or his generals lead his tribe of Mongols to beat another one of the nomadic tribes. And I wondered, okay, is this going to be, are we going to see a battle that's kind of Jin Yong's own invention, or is it going to echo what I've read learning about these guys? And it kind of read exactly like they didn't use brute force, they used trickery, they kept their distance, and then once they were in a position to win, then they used the kind of brute force, which was exactly
then they start hacking.
Yeah, it's what I'd learned from history, and it was I enjoyed that alongside the kind of one-on-one fights. Yeah. I don't really have
more
much
battles
to
to come.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, I'll keep reading.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what the story's about. Now I'm going to be a little bit awful here and use some commercial language. What would you say is the biggest selling point of Condor Heroes?
It's the sheer joy of a great story. And one that's been loved by literally millions or billions of people that haven't been accessible to non-Asian language speakers. Okay, that's not a very elegantly put word, but
we know what you mean.
Condors hasn't really been translated into many European languages before this. But now it is being translated into German, Italian, Finnish, Romanian,
wow, Finnish,
Polish. Finnish is, I think, book 3 is coming out very soon.
Oh, cool.
And Portuguese, Spanish. Yeah, well, basically most of the major, a good handful of major European languages. So I think it's a great story. It's a great fun story that you can just get excited about.
Yeah, when you said Finnish, did you know that there is a joint Finnish-Chinese wuxia film?
What is it called? I don't actually.
It's called Jade Warrior, and it's from 2006, and it combines, I think, maybe a story from Chinese wuxia or traditions with some like Viking. Finnish stories. Not I think Vikings, Finland,
but, or
that like Northern European, yeah. I've not seen it since I was a teenager. It's a weird film.
Know.
It's not a kid. It's a very strange film.
I might know it its Chinese name, but
oh, maybe. All right, I'm going to really swiftly open Wikipedia and see if there's a Chinese language page for it. Languages. Oh,
Wikipedia is very good
Chinese,
for that.
Yeah, the Chinese is even on the English language page. Yu Zhan Shi. So just literal Jade Warrior. Yu Zhan Shi.
I don't think I know. Yeah.
It's a weird film. It's good, but it's really quite odd.
I'm going to look and see if it's on the Chinese internet. I've got all these VIPs, all these websites these days.
Right. While you're doing that, I'll throw you a question. Do you have a favorite martial artist in Condor Heroes? Because there is an awful lot of them.
Yeah, my favorite one is Cycle Mei, the villain of A Hero Born. Because she Abandon opens with a very long flashback of her youth, and so she really, I feel like, quite close to her, having worked on her memories, and to see how she's not an evil person. She doesn't set out to cause harm to people or kill people. It was circumstance and misfortune and a little bit of her own personality and a lot of misunderstanding that put her on that path, and that makes her a really, really rich character. And she's got really badass kung fu.
Yeah, I was wondering if you might say one of the female characters, and I thought about writing a question about them, but I wasn't really sure what to say. But just a thing that I think is a amazing standout for even my first experience of watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is number one that there are female warrior characters in these historical kind of epic kung fu films. That's number one. Number two is that they can hold they're just as strong and dangerous as the male fighters. That's number two. And then what would number three be? I guess that if you were looking for things to criticize, some of them are, that what am I trying to say? They maybe do also have some traditional feminine traits that a reader looking for like a feminist classic maybe wouldn't find. So there's lots of things that I'm not really in a position to get my head around. But do you have anything to say about the female Xiaren, the wuxia characters?
Yeah, I think there are frustrating points about them, but they exist and they're quite good at fighting, as you said. And I think traditionally in sort of Chinese stories, with female characters are often quite prominent, whether as in that sort of scholars and beauties love interest stories. They do play an equal role, and there is a tradition also stronger females that are either rallying against the system or fighting on behalf of the men within the patriarchy. So they exist. Might not be in the best of situation, but they do, and they might have a much steeper slope to climb. But I think definitely in Jin stories, they are, they're all quite, they're generally quite powerful women.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about their love life, though.
That's
an entirely different matter.
Yeah, you're not gonna get any. There's no big badges there for fighting the patriarchy in the love stories. What was I going to say? Oh yes, in my homework, admittedly Wikipedia homework, I came across a paragraph or two saying like the first instances of like female warriors in Chinese literature are from like the Tang Dynasty or something. And it's just really interesting to compare that to like, I mean, admittedly, I'm not an expert, but if I try and think of some female warrior from your ancient or very old European literature, I can only think of two examples, and neither really count. One's Joan of Arc, who's not a literary character. She was a real person. Yeah. And then maybe in Britain, Boudica, the Celtic queen. Again, not a literary character, a real person. And then the only one I can think of that is a literary character is the Grendel's mum from Beowulf. Not really a role model.
No. Yeah. Whereas like in China, you get a lot of, from Mulan to made into Disney films, so everyone now knows who she is, or like the Yangmen Yu Zhang, the wives of the General Yongs, who were also in the Song Dynasty, and there are loads more. I mean, they might be minor characters, but they exist more frequently than.
I remember hearing about the character Mulan from. I might ask that question.
It's okay.
I don't want to provoke the Disney fans, especially not since I'm on Twitter. All right, question number 2. Yeah, so this is about the plot structure of A Hero Born. We were talking before about how it's like an epic story of a young person's personal development and whatnot, and it reminded me definitely of some of the like teen fantasy and sci-fi books I read as a teen. Surprisingly enough, I was reading teen fiction when I was a teen, but just as well as that, reminding me of stuff I'd read from English language teen fiction. I got the feeling that there's a lot of like archetypes here. It's like a Joseph Campbell style hero's journey, and not in the sense that I'm trying to say Jin Yong was inspired by Joseph Campbell's hero's journey academic work, but more the point that what Joseph Campbell was trying to do was find universal things, mythic things that go into all world human storytelling and literature. And sometimes you wonder, well, actually, so many stories don't fit his pattern. What was he really talking about? And then you'll read a properly epic story that really does hit all those different points he described in A Hero's Journey. So the question I want to ask is, do you think Condor Heroes is either intentionally or just by nature of what it is, like an epic, mythic, universal story that kind of can be read like that, or do you think it's more specific?
I think it is pretty universal, because it's the journey of a young man and a young woman's passage into adulthood. Right. And that journey, we are all humans. There might be some cultural difference of what you end up doing to get to the other end, but the growth and the difficulties and the things that you have to face, that you have to discover, are more or less the same. Discovering honor, love, purpose, who you are and what's important to you and what's not important in life, or all that. Those are quite universal values, or, good or evil. A lot of it there's a lot of common points. And I think because the novel exists because he's writing a serialized stories to entice people to read his newspaper. He's definitely going for the broadest appeal.
Yeah, I guess it's important not to lose sight of that. Reminds me a bit when I was doing my first year of my English degree, and we were given, I forget which Jane Austen book it was, but we were given a Jane Austen book, and then that immediately was followed by a Charles Dickens book. And all the Jane Austen I've read, my experience has been, this is very insightful. This is incredibly insightful, but I'm not actually enjoying reading it. I'm reading this at a snail's
because you're not the target audience.
I guess I'm not. No.
Yeah,
I've
or not quite
myself.
yet. Yeah, but Dickens is
maybe when I'm older.
Serialized.
Oh yeah.
And it is trying to hit anyone that could read it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he was like you said, serialized, writing in papers. Every chapter ends on a hook, and it's for everyone. And
and you don't have to be, I don't know, 6-year-old or 10-year-old and a street urchin to understand what everyone's going to put yourself into his shoes and get excited about it.
Right. Yeah, but I guess the point I was heading for there was that you could pick up the Dickens book, or indeed Condor Heroes, and unless you're explicitly told, you maybe wouldn't know that its original form was serialized, which again, I guess, goes to a strength of both of them, that although they were written in that format, they've transitioned into a book, and it reads, like a book. It's
definitely
good.
Because what we read now, what we know these days of Condor Heroes is 40 chapters, but actually when it was serialized, a chapter is much shorter. There are probably hundreds of, 3 times or 4 times, 5 times as many chapters, because they're only a strip on top of the newspaper. It's not a whole full page. So the story, you don't usually find out where one day's story seep into the next. You can't find the sort of connection point. You just read it as a whole.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and last formal question I've got written down about the story. As I've said, like, one of the things I was enjoying the most was like visualizing the map and the bigger struggles, like the Song, the Jin, and the Mongols. So this is probably in fact, no, it's not an easy question. Out of the Southern Song, the Jin, Jurchen, and the Mongols that Guo Jing's growing up with, are you rooting for any one particular team there as you're reading?
Well, the story, because you grow with Guo Jing, and his final allegiance is obviously with the Song, where his family, his bloodline came from. So you feel torn for him because, he grew up with the Mongols. He's very good friends with all the people. But when it comes to a point in his life, he had to choose, and he knew he quite very quickly worked out how he should choose, or there is actually no choice.
Right.
So your emotion, you definitely get pulled along by him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of found, that as far as those, like, 3 teams, the book basically kind of, although with the characters, you could side with an individual character or have your opinion about them, these bigger kind of, like, factions, the book is more guiding you to read one as a particular way. A thing that, I'm maybe looking for a level of complexity that wasn't there, but I was wondering, we see the Song as being particularly Chinese, and the Mongols are definitely living in a very different society. And I was curious to see how the Jin would be depicted, and they kind of just read as not so different from the Song, but bad guys. I think most of their names were names in Pinyin, but maybe I was looking for something that was never going to be there in the first place.
Because the Jurchen language is practically, I think, lost in how it's pronounced. So I think academically, all Jurchen's emperors and names can only be transcribed in Pinyin.
Right.
Yeah, and they I guess in the book they're portrayed as in between Mongol and the Song, so they're still good at battles, got good cavalry and horses, but they're not as good as the Mongols.
They're not as cool as the Mongols either.
No,
they're kind of just jerks.
Yeah.
So that's all my questions about the story. I'd like to ask just some kind of miscellaneous questions here. So there's a thing it was a thing I introduced to the show, then I forgot to do for a while, but now I've like standardized it and brought it back. It's having a word of the day. Pardon me, a Chinese word of the day. So can you suggest one from this episode? It could be related to Condor Heroes in any way you fancy.
I thought quite cheesy. 忠肝义胆.
Even better. 忠肝义胆.
Yeah, so 忠肝义胆. So it's like the loyal liver and the righteous gallbladder. Because in Chinese, anything to do with bravery and courage is represented by the gallbladder and the liver. Which is quite interesting, considering in English, lily-livered is talking about cowards.
Right.
So there is some strange intersection where the liver is representing the two sides of the same emotion. Yeah.
That's very strange.
Courage and cowardice is all hinges upon the same physical organ.
Yeah. I could think of a couple more in the same ballpark in English. We say like how much he's got guts, he's gutsy, or he's not got the stomach for it. I'm weak stomached.
Yes.
But it's funny that it's the exact same organ. That's amazing.
Yeah. But the sort of
cool.
The flip side of the meaning. But it's very interesting how these sort of entrails play a role in terms of these feelings of bravery or loyalty or courage, which I guess it sort of across culture, it's something that is very deeply human and it's like inside of you.
Your core, yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I'll put the characters and the pinyin and the meaning for that in the show notes for anyone listening. If you guys want to teach yourself some martial Chinese, thank you for that, Gigi. Yeah. That was really cool. Okay, so the next question is also a bit random, a fun one. Don't take it too seriously, but if you could be any character from Condor Heroes, who would you be?
I think I quite like to be like Guojing got the most exciting adventure, so he'll be a fun one to be, and maybe actually some of the smaller characters could also be interesting, like the Heretic of the East, Apothecary Huang, because he also went through a journey, parting from his family and making his own place in society, and then basically turning his back on everyone. There are quite a lot of the women, unfortunately, don't have as good a life. So
no.
Yeah, so I think it's the men who gets all the fun.
There was one female character who was, I don't know, she was the one, maybe just by not being as conspicuous as some of the other ones, seemed quite interesting. I've forgotten how she's named. It's been a while since I read Hero Born. But among the 7 Freaks of the South, there's one lady.
Oh, Jade Han, yeah.
Jade, I was thinking Jade Han. I was worried that was wrong. Yeah, I mean, I've only read the one book.
Yeah.
Do you feel that she is treated more as an equal, or do you think it's also not quite up to
She's treated
par?
as an equal, but you don't really know much about this. Very, very little about who she is.
Right. Yeah.
Her backstory, that is quite limited in the book.
She's kind of a fairly blank sort of, or not blank, but
it's a character that you feel in whatever you want about her.
Yeah. Okay. Last of the random questions. I guess there's only so much we can say about a placeholder character. Last question here. It's your little slot for some self promo. So, where can listeners find you online? Where can they find your work? And are you working on anything just now that you'd like to point people towards?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, but I don't really post much. I just retweets. And for my work, you can find the first 3 books of Condor Heroes, Legends of the Condor Heroes. So, the first book, A Born Undone, is translated by Anna. The second one, the first one, A Hero Born, it was translated by Anna. The second one, A Born Undone, translated by me. And then the third book, Snake Lies Waiting, is translated by Anna and me. They are all out in the UK and a good part of the world. A Snake Lies Waiting will be out in the US later this year, I think September. And these 3 books are also on audio, so you can find it on Audible and other good audiobook places, read by a very good British East Asian stage actor, Daniel York Low. the books are available practically everywhere in the world from any good bookstore.
I was going to say you can probably get these in your bookshop rather than Amazon pretty easily. I got my Hero Barn from an independent bookshop.
Yes, you should go to your local independent bookshop, and they should be available everywhere in the world now. At least book 1 and book 2.
Yeah. Although speaking of Amazon, I think I saw book 4 up for pre-order on Amazon.
Probably, yeah. So we're working on book 4. So now is in the editor's hands.
Right. Exciting.
Yes, scary times.
Before we part ways here and head off on our respective heroic journeys, I wonder if our listeners want to check out more wuxia, either in translation or even in the original Chinese, where would you point them towards?
I would actually, if you've never read or any wuxia, I would start from films. So there's a lot of classic martial arts films, especially those from Hong Kong's in the sort of Shaw Brothers, Bruce Lee, Jin Yong adaptations in the 80s and 90s, or Jet Li's films like his Huang Fei Hong, or the more recent Donnie Yen, Ip Man. I would start from films because they're shorter than TV series to just get... and then there's obviously Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragons, and all the other films that we mentioned earlier, because they would give you an idea of the world, of the logics, of the fighting. And because, as I said before, for Chinese readers, we have quite a good visual imagination for the content because of either classical Chinese theatre or full films and TV. And then for books, there are 3 more titles of Jin Yong that's been officially published. The Book and the Sword, translated by Graham Earnshaw. Fox Fallen of the Snowy Mountain, translated by Olivia Mock, and The Deer and the Cauldron, translated by John Minford. There are also a handful of other wuxia writers that's been translated in English that are published officially. I think one of them would be Gulong's 11th Son. There's also a sizable web community of wuxia fans who do their own translation of both classics and more recent novels popular in China. And if you punch in wuxia in the search engine, you will find these websites.
Yeah, I've got a couple of those translators working in that field are going to be guests in this wuxia series of podcast episodes, all things going according to plan. It's an alien world. Well, alien. It's an unexplored territory for me, terra incognita, web wuxia. But I'm really looking forward to reading some of it. They would
know much better, because I do feel quite old when it comes to web novels. I felt like
likewise.
It's a different generation. Yeah, I struggle to read ebooks.
Oh, I'm a Kindle fiend, but reading on a web page is I'm not necessarily a fiend for that. Yeah. A thing popped into my head there. Thank you, by the way, for that fantastic list of pointers for stuff in translation. That'll be really useful for some of our guests, I think, and for myself.
Good.
So thank you a lot for that. A note. Almost to end on, just speaking of generations, so this is from a little anecdote from my own experience teaching in China. So the first school I was at was just it was a fairly normal Chinese school, and then later I went to teach at an international school. And at the international school, walking through the hallway for like the lower grades, you'd see the boy, one of the new Star Wars films, The Force Awakens had just come out, and you'd see the boys going, "Nyo, nyo, ha ha ha," doing like lightsaber battles, noises, just like zhong, zhong, just like when I was wee. But in that school in Zhejiang, the more generic Chinese school, you'd see the boys shooting chi blasts, gathering their chi, and then I was like, what are they doing? And then I realized, oh yeah, it's the same thing. But
have you not played Street Fighter?
I have. Well, I mostly watch my sibling play it because I suck at it. But yeah, the Hadouken is the chi blast is the ancestor of the Hadouken, I guess.
The blue light, the blue ball flame.
Yeah. I remember that when I was watching my sister play the Street Fighter, noticing that the game is quite careful to like give every fighter a nationality and a flag, and it was interesting. It would be interesting to go back and look at them, but I remember like everyone has their own styles, and one of the Chinese characters, Gen, I guess he'd be called, you could switch him between two different styles. I think one was Mantis and one was Crane or something. So yeah, a whole.
So there's like Shaolin Kung Fu then, or something like that.
I guess he's something like that, and then there are other, like there are Hong Kong characters. Is there a Taiwan character? I don't know.
I don't remember very well.
But some of them are like some are moderns, some are more classic.
Yeah, I was pretty rubbish at it, so I didn't go through that many characters or moves. Yeah.
The one character I always played was also a Chinese character, Chun-Li, but not because she was Chinese. Yeah, just because you could mash a button and she kicked really fast.
Yeah, then she kicks, yes. She's easy to get kicking. Yeah.
A good way to hold your own against the experts. Yes. Just have your legs.
Just smash the console.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the ultimate victory. Transcend the machine.
Yeah.
Speaking of transcending technology, we should probably bring our call to a close. One more question. What are you reading just now?
I'm terrible because I always start books and take forever to finish them. So I'm probably on like 4 or 5 books right now. Some of them I've been reading for years. The first one is Yao, and mostly in Chinese, Yao Xueying's Li Zhicheng, which is a 10-volume novel on the farmer rebel who toppled the Ming dynasty, but then he got booted out by the Qing. So I've been reading it for 10 years now.
I have a good anecdote about him, actually. I have to tell this now. So my first year in China, at the end of it, my mum came to visit me and we went traveling, and she really wanted to see Beijing. So we went to Beijing and we went through the whole Forbidden City and then went to the park at the back of it.
Jingsha.
Jingsha, right. And the tree that, because is he called Li Zicheng? Was that his name?
It's the tree where the Ming Emperor Chongzheng hanged himself.
Right, so that episode from history, we were walking along, we came upon the tree. I was reading the little plaque that described that event in history, which I think I had, it was ringing a bell because I'd read John Key's China History, so I was like, oh, this is the tree. And I was about to turn around and tell my mum, this is the tree where so-and-so important figure hanged himself. But there was an old guy just a few paces away from us, and he looked at my mum and me and went, and mimed a guy hanging himself. So that one's burned into my memory.
Oh, that's fun.
Sounds like an interesting book anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm now trying to get to the end. He's about to die, I think. I just want to know how it... you know how it ends, but you just don't want to know how they got to that point. The other book that I just started reading is a Hong Kong writer's new book, Ma Jiahui's new book. I don't know, how do I say it in Mandarin? 鸳鸯六七四, which apparently is, I don't think it's got an English title, which apparently is a mahjong configuration.
Interesting.
I'll leave it at that because I can't explain
much. Okay, I won't demand you explain. That's
and
fine.
The third book that I'm reading right now is J.G. Bartlett's Miracles of Life, which is a collection of memories and essays from his life. So it starts in Shanghai, because I lived in Shanghai for 10 years and just moved to Shenzhen for the last year. So it's quite nice to read about Shanghai. You know, I know all the places he talked about. He cycled around and
I really need to read that. That sounds fantastic. Yeah. I might have told this anecdote on the show before, so I'll do it really quickly. But I read Empire of the Sun just before moving to Shanghai, and it so happened a few months after I moved there, I ended up working at SHSID, Shanghai High School International Division, Shanghai Zhongshe Guojibu. That was originally the site of a different school, but between being the different school and the one it is now, that was the internment camp that Gigi Ballard and his parents were kept at.
Oh, his parents, so not in Longhua.
Yeah, Longhua.
Okay, because he was in Longhua.
I think, as I understand it, in the book, his parents are gone, but in real life, his parents were there.
Oh, I think they were together. Yes.
Right, but yeah, and there's a foreign teacher there who does a little J.G. Ballard tour of the campus each year.
Oh, really? Oh, never. I wish I've gone on, because I've seen online about J.G. fans going to find the camp and taking. I think they demolished it not very long ago, and like the old architecture that might have been the internment camp. And I remember people talking about
most of the buildings
bricks.
are gone. Yeah.
Yeah. But J.G.'s house.
There are a few that are still there.
J.G.'s house is still there.
On
not Xinhua Lu, the one next to Xinhua Lu. I've forgotten what it's called now. But yeah.
My Shanghai inner street map is good, but not that good. But yeah, I really need to read that book.
No, he's not in Wanping Lu. Oh God, I've forgotten all the street names as well. But anyway, he cycles very fast.
Right.
It used to take him an hour to cycle from his house to the Bund. And, 1930s, creaky old bikes, bad roads, 1 hour to the Bund. But I know that we were about 8 kilometers, I think. And I know it would take me about an hour to cycle to the Bund as well, because there are just so many traffic lights.
Some of my happiest memories of Shanghai were cycling, not in the center, although that can be nice, but around Shanghai High School, that's near the first ring road. So in that sort of distance from the center, you can get some really nice rides on your mobike, your little digital rental bike things. Some very happy memories of doing that.
Yeah, I lived in Shanghai for so long, I've got my own bike. So it's the time before mobikes. We all got our own, some friends got fixies, I've got I had an old Fenghuang Phoenix, but that was just too much hard work, so I went for a Giant in the end, and I struggle on mobike because they're too slow.
Right, yeah, they're pretty basic. Now that we're talking about mobikes, it probably is time to
yes.
to part ways.
Wrap up, yeah.
Especially since any listeners who've never seen a mobike are probably thinking, what is this? What are they talking about?
Put a picture on.
I should put a link in the show notes. But yeah, it's been really good having you on. Thank you so much. You've certainly taught me a lot. Yeah, very welcome. I think it's been a fantastic start to the Wuxia season.
Yeah, I look forward to listening to the rest of them.
So thank you again to Gigi Chang. That was a fantastic chat and a great kickoff to our TrChFic Wuxia season. Really, really fantastic. Thank you so much, Gigi. Now let's do the plugs, the little kind of end of show self-promo stuff. So here's something that a lot of podcasts mention, but I've kind of neglected to push so far, but I'm going to push it now. And that's asking you guys listening for reviews on iTunes. So if you really like the show and you have an iTunes or Apple, whatever it's called, account, please do leave an iTunes review. That's it's not just a way to make me feel nice. It's a really good way to boost the show's prevalence in search results on iTunes. Of course, if you use another podcast provider that has a slot for leaving reviews or comments, please leave them there too. That would be fantastic for just kind of helping the show, helping people who would like the show to find it. That's kind of the idea there. Be fantastic if you could do that. Here's something that you guys can get from me. I just yesterday put up a bonus episode on the show's Patreon page. It was on the author Han Han, who I'm looking to do a show at after the Wuxia season. So kind of like just my initial thoughts on learning about him. I've since read his book 1988, I Want to Talk to the World, and what I can say about him is he's a crazy fellow. Loads of strange things I learned. I also put quite a lot of other bonus episodes up on the Patreon. To give you an example, there's another one where I went story through the anthology, Chinese sci-fi anthology, The Reincarnated Giant. And I've recorded another one, which will be the next one I'm putting up, where I do the same thing for Ken Liu's Invisible Planets anthology. So what I'm trying to say is there's loads of cool extra shows up there on the Patreon, and if you guys become Patreon supporters from just $1 a month, you've got access to all of that stuff. If you'd like to support the show with your lovely, lovely money, but would rather not commit to a monthly contribution, then there is a website for that too. That's Buy Me a Coffee. So both of those sites, just put in the name of the site, patreon.com, buymeacoffee.com, and then /TrChFic, TrChFic. So there's the financial ways you can give me money. I am a master of the English language. So the next thing I'd like to promote is the Podbean. So I talked about this in the TrChFic news, but again, if you're listening on SoundCloud, now would be a great time to hop over and subscribe on any podcast app, and also to check out the new Podbean homepage, because it's really cool. So just go to TrChFic.podbean.com and you can see the map and episode art, and I'm going to put as many interesting pages there as I can. And here's an idea I had in my head that I'm going to put out there now. If you'd like to write a guest blog, if you've got anything you'd like to write about any of the stories we've covered or anything about Chinese writing and fiction, contact me and we'll get your guest blog up there on Podbean site, because I can create pages. I think that would be a fun thing, but we'll see if anyone bites that little line I've thrown out right now. How to get into contact with me though, that's another question. Well, the two best places to do it for show related things are Instagram and Twitter. So the show has a Instagram account. It's at TrChFic, TrChFic. That's where we live on Instagram. On Twitter, I just use kind of like my own account as also the show account. So it's at Angus Likes Words, and that's also a good place to talk to me. And another place where you can get in touch with myself, but also listeners of the show, is the show Discord. So there's a link for that in the link tree that I have on my Twitter and my Instagram, and the link is also at the bottom of all the show episode descriptions. If your podcast provider doesn't read the links properly in the show descriptions, again, just go to the Podbean, all the stuff is there. So yeah, I think that is all the plugs. Now, it's traditional that I tell you the best thing you can do for the show, and that is to spread the word. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone who might be interested. Tell your Shifu, the Kung Fu master, who is imparting all of his knowledge, his moves, and eventually his inner chi energy. When you receive that, return the favor by telling him that there's a very good podcast newly hosted on Podbean called the Translated Chinese Fiction Podcast, and then your Shifu will look at you with a look of great confusion and say, "Why are you telling me this?" But then you say nothing. You just leave it at that, and then eventually his curiosity will lead him to listen to the show and become a Patreon subscriber. So you can see why I'm interested in making you tell him. But anyway, that's all certain to happen. I just know you'll do that. So until you have done that, 再见.